Welcome and hi, everybody. I just want to welcome everybody to our Conquer Anxiety and Toxicity Summit. I'm just really excited to be able to have a guest speaker who's going to be talking about self-compassion and mindfulness. And, I know that we ask questions, what's the difference between self-compassion and mindfulness? We are going to get into that. And also, I have a lot of parents come to me and they're asking me, how can they help and support their children to be more compassionate? And we're definitely going to be looking into that. Hi, I'm Deb Kartz. I'll be your host today. I'm the founder of Healing Mom's Journey, and I really want to welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Karen Bluth. Is a faculty in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of North Carolina and research fellow at the University of North Carolina Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute, where she conducts research on self-compassion and its influences on the emotional well-being of teens. Dr. Bluth is also an author of many books and a co-author of many books as well of self-compassion and mindfulness. Those are really, it's something that you really need to look into. Dr. Karen Bluth is a mindful practitioner for over 40 years as a mindful teacher and an educator with 18 years of classroom teaching. Dr. Bluth frequently gives talks, conducts workshops, and teaches classes in self-compassion and mindfulness in education and community settings. In addition, she trains teachers in mindful self-compassion for teens internationally. Dr. Bluth, you sure have a lot of wealth and knowledge to share with us. I'm so excited that you're on this platform to share a lot of this knowledge. Could you just tell me a little bit about your journey, how you even started getting into self-compassion and mindfulness?
Sure, and I'm really happy to be here. I actually started when I was a senior in high school. I needed a project, a topic for an independent study project for an English class. And it was the mid-70s. I was driving down the road and the topic was due the next day. I didn't have it. I didn't know what I was going to do it on. And I saw at the side of the road this sign that said something about meditation. And I remembered learning about something about Zen and Zen meditation in one of my classes. And I thought, oh, that looks interesting. And I pulled in and learned about, at that point, it was transcendental meditation. But that's when I started meditating. I was 17. So it's been a long road. And that's how I got into mindfulness. So I practiced for a while and kind of fell out of it when I went to college and then got back into it after college. And then at that point, in the mid 80s, it was mindfulness meditation. And then sometime in the 90s, I had a meditation group that I was practicing with. And we started passing around this cassette tape, which tells you how long ago it was, on poetry of self-compassion, read by the poet David White. And it was at a time when I had little kids, and I think like a lot of moms, I had trouble getting them to take their naps in the afternoon. So I put them in the car and drive around, and this tape was in my cassette deck. And so I would listen to these poems all about self-compassion, and they really became internalized within me, and that's when I really felt like self-compassion really struck a chord with me. And then years later, when I went back to school to get my PhD, was the beginning. I started looking into doing my dissertation on mindfulness or self-compassion. And it was when the self-compassion research was just starting to come out. So the first research was in 2003, and this was maybe 5 years later, 2008. So I started learning about self-compassion research at that point.
Wow, that's quite the journey. And it's interesting, 17. And I think this is kind of cool to tell our kids when they're in school, like, don't give up on yourself. If you don't have an assignment, go look at the street signs. I think that is Absolutely awesome. That's actually being very creative. And I know when I work with some of the kids that I do work with, I do try to express to be creative, just to get it, just let it flow. And yeah, self-compassion and mindfulness, like I never really started dabbling in it till just probably just a few years ago. And I did find how important it is for our mental well-being and our health. And especially now, I'm finding that kids are actually gravitating to it, which absolutely amazed me that they actually would, because I know when I was a kid, I'd probably, no, I wouldn't. So I find that the whole pendulum is changing, and mental health is really changing, and the word is getting out there. So we're trying to, that stigma of being, having anxiety and all the toxicities around you. And now that we're starting to get a little bit more aware of exactly what mental health is. And as you know, right now with COVID and people being isolated and the unknowns has been really, really trying on a lot of us parents as well as our children. So I'd like to really ask you, what is self-compassion and how can it help parents reduce their own anxiety?
Yeah, so self-compassion is one definition of it is treating yourself the way you would treat a good friend when you're struggling, when you're having a hard time. So you think about what compassion is. Compassion is being kind to someone else when they're suffering, doing something, and there's an active component there. So doing something for someone else when they're struggling. We readily do that for our friends, but we don't do it for ourselves. So we know that 80% of us are kinder to other people than we are to ourselves. When we're struggling, when we're having a hard time, we tend to beat ourselves up. We tend to be harsh to ourselves. And, honestly, what we know from research is that it's not helpful. There's a more formal definition of self compassion, and that is that it has three components. The first component is mindfulness. So, and in this context, mindfulness is having a balanced perspective. So when something hard happens, you have a difficult interaction with your child, for example, or maybe you blow up at your child. Um, Keeping it in perspective, not saying to yourself, "Ugh, I'm such an idiot. I'm so stupid. The worst mom in the world. I'm the worst dad in the world." Um, but maybe something like, well, this may not have been my best moment, but it's also not the end of the world, and I can make things right. So maintaining some kind of perspective. The second component of self-compassion is common humanity, and common humanity is the understanding um, that we're not alone in our struggles and in our suffering. That in fact, these difficult emotions that we feel, things like frustration and anger and hurt and loneliness and despair, are really part of being human. It's part of the human condition. And often when we're feeling those things, we think we're the only ones. We feel very isolated. We think, oh, I'm the only parent. I'm the only mom that loses it with my kids. My other friends, the other moms that I know don't do that. And although intellectually we may know that that's not true, when it actually happens to us, we tend to forget. So that's common humanity. The last component, the third component of self compassion is self kindness. So this is when you take an active role in doing something or saying something kind to yourself. So maybe something like, I'm so sorry that you're struggling in this way. Um, I know you did your best. You're dealing with a lot right now. The kinds of things you might say to a good friend. You can say those things to yourself. Or you can do what we call behavioral self compassion. And that's, taking a walk, having a cup of tea, um, watching a funny movie, talking to a friend, things that would make you feel better. So, yeah, self compassion.
I really like how you really put it into 3 different segments. It makes it really clear, because a lot of people think self-compassion is just having, empathy for ourselves, when actually we really need to think about, like, of course, is the other person as well. And when we actually think about somebody else's feelings, it actually helps us with ours. But I like how you also said it's really important for us to really dive into that as well, because blame, shame, I say shut the brain. And in my website, my motto is, if mom isn't okay, then no one's okay. And I learned the hard way through my own journey that I didn't have a lot of self-compassion, and it didn't matter the tools that I had to use to support my kids, it wasn't working. So being able to dive inside and self-reflect, and like you were saying, you're not alone in the struggles of parenthood. And I do have to mention, a lot of feedback, and a lot of the parents I do support feel they are all alone. So I think this is really valuable information to let them know that no, you're not the only one that screams or yells at their kids, right? But I also like how you say that it's okay, we have to forgive ourselves and make sure that we dive into those feelings to validate our own feelings, because we are human. And I like how you left your cup of tea, because I told the mom the other day, I says, you really need to start thinking of yourself and go grab a cup of tea, go into the bathtub and just put all those nice incense on. And she did call me back 2 days later, and she said she did, and she felt revived. So I thought, yay. But it matters being consistent, I think, is the rule.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a really good segue into, having self-compassion for others and for ourselves, and really understanding and going deep. But what is the difference between mindfulness and self-compassion? I think there's a lot of confusion around that.
Yeah, so mindfulness is having the awareness of what's going on in the present moment. So, and being aware of your feelings, your thoughts that are coming up. Um, so it's an orientation to the present moment, to what's going on in the present moment. Self-compassion has mindfulness in it, and mindfulness also has self-compassion. But they're different in that self-compassion is more oriented to the person who's experiencing the difficult emotions. So it's about the experiencer as opposed to about the experience. And mindfulness says notice your thoughts, notice your emotions, notice what's going on in your internal world, in your external world. Self-compassion says notice this, but also take an active role in comforting yourself and it's supporting yourself when you need it. So there's this active piece to it, which isn't in mindfulness. So they're both important, and they both have the other one within it, but they're different constructs, and they're practiced a little bit differently. And one thing I wanted to add to what you were saying when you're talking about the mom, who you encourage to take some time for herself. That's so important. It's so important. And I work a lot with healthcare workers also. And often people don't have the time to do it, particularly people like moms, right?
Yes.
Or especially when your kids are little. And as I mentioned to you, I am the parent of 2 now young adults, but they were little kids at one point. I know totally what it's like. And often you don't, every minute of your day is just taken up. It's hard to get time for yourself. So one huge advantage of self-compassion is that you can do it right there in the moment. So when you're feeling like, a piece of crap because you said something to your child that you shouldn't have said, that you feel really badly about, in that moment you can soothe yourself, or you can comfort yourself, you can be there for yourself, and you can so that you're filling your resources, you're filling your tank so that you have more to give.
So could you give an example? Like, I know this is really a big pushback we get with a lot of moms. I don't have the time. So when you're in that moment, can you give an example what that would look like? Would it be more self-talk, or would it just be leaving the room and just giving yourself that breathing room? Like, what kind of an example could you give for parents?
Yeah, it could be self-talk, like I just gave some examples of self-talk. Um, it could also be, we teach this, so when we teach self-compassion classes, we teach all these different tools that people can use. And so one I'll just share is what we call comforting gestures. And we do these for other people all the time. So if a friend is feeling badly, or your child is, fell and hurt themselves, you would think nothing of putting your arm around them, picking them up and hugging them, giving them physical touch, right? What we know is that physical touch, warmth, and soft vocalizations are comforting, those three things. We know they cause a physiological change in your body, release of oxytocin, which is the feel-good hormone.
Right.
But we don't do that for ourselves, right? We don't, generally soothe ourselves in that way, but we can learn to. So we teach comforting gestures. So things like, stroking your arms, giving yourself a hug, putting your hand on your heart or two hands on your heart. I find I do a lot of this, just fix my camera a little bit, just,
Oh, right.
and it's just like in that moment, okay. And then maybe accompanying it with some soothing words like, sorry, you did your best. You did your best. It's not the end of the world, And the nice thing about being a parent, and I can say this because I'm coming out the other side with, children who are 27 and 29, is that, I made plenty of mistakes, plenty, and my kids are well-grounded, healthy individuals and still learning, and so with all the mistakes that I made, you have plenty of time to correct them. I have found that as a mom that, and I made some bad mistakes, you know, but it really isn't the end of the world. You can, um, there's plenty of time to do whatever you need to do to make up for those.
Exactly. And that's one thing that I do teach is it is never too late to start and understanding what the behavior is trying to communicate. And I like how you said when we do that physical and touch and like with the thymus is like that really stimulates us. And I know I always like to go like this and do that stretching. And there's all those points in our fingers that actually releases a lot of stress. And same with the pinching in here. Some people see that I'm always doing with my fingers, but I guess I automatically do it without realizing it. And I do like how you say that we always, nobody's perfect. We do mess up as a parent and it's never too late. Absolutely. Like my children all three of them suffer from anxiety. I mean, we had quite a bit of trauma in our life and they're still working on it. And me as the parent, I always, get on the phone and go, okay, what is their need? What is their voice saying? Are they really excited to want to share something, or are they really down and they just need a bit of guidance? So it is never too late. And I really like how you did mention that, because I even talked to a parent today. I was teaching today, a young parent, and down on herself because her child was like punching her and going crazy. And I says, that's okay. Take a deep breath, because obviously you missed something in that behavior, was communicating something. Walk away and go back and visit it. We visited it together, and then she found out what he wanted was just a bit of a connection, that physical connection, a hug, and all those kind of things. Those little tiny things build up to be a lot. And I can't stress enough how valuable it is to be able to have those connections. And going forward here, I'm really interested to know, what does research say about self-compassion? Because a lot of people and this is the feedback I've got personally, a lot of people don't believe there's a lot of research on it, and it's just, just out there. So, and I do try to explain to people there is evidence-based research on it, but I don't know much about it. Could you share something on that?
Sure. There's actually a lot of research on it. So I mentioned that the first studies were published in 2003, so it's been almost 20 years. Um, there's a lot. So what the research shows is with adults and with teens, and I'm a researcher, I do research mostly with teens, some with adults, that those people who are more self-compassionate have less anxiety, less depression, and less stress overall. We also know with our intervention research, so when we actually teach self-compassion, self-compassion is modifiable, so you can grow your self-compassion, and that at the end of at the end of a program, people have less anxiety, depression, stress, also better overall well-being, more satisfaction with their lives, more resilience, more motivation, more ability to move outside their comfort zone and try new things. So one of the misunderstandings or misgivings about self-compassion is that, oh, it's going to make you soft, you're going to lose your edge, lose your motivation. And what we know from research is that this isn't true, that people are actually more motivated when they're more self-compassionate because they don't have the same fear of failure. They know if they try something new and they fail, that they're not going to beat themselves up, that they'll take it in stride. They'll take responsibility for it. Oh, that's, other research shows that also, that people who are more self-compassionate don't let themselves off the hook. They take more responsibility for their mistakes and apologize, or more readily apologize. So yeah, that's what some of the research shows.
So that's really interesting. I really like how you say that, especially like it's, some people would think that, it's kind of out there to be even trying to do it, like a flu thing. But I really like how you said that, if we think we failed at something, and I'm just going to talk about kids here, because I know there's this, when a child fails at something, to get them to go ahead and do something again, quite often you get a lot of resistance, and they feel like a failure, they take it inside and they just completely clam up, or the next time you present them with the exact same task, they end up blowing up. So I really like that fact that, we can teach self-compassion to even our children. And I think that's really important. So we do know that self-compassion is good for our kids. But the one thing is, and I think it would be a biggest struggle for parents, how do we actually help our children have more self-compassion? And I just want to touch bases with, especially some of our children that are on the spectrum are really hard on themselves, and to be able to teach them self-compassion would be mind-blowing, and it'd be so so great for the parents to understand that, wow, my child can succeed.
Mhm.
So yeah, so if we can figure out, I know the parents always say like, oh, like, how do you teach self-compassion? And actually, I have had parents ask me, like, it's got to come within. How do you teach it, especially to your children?
Well, the first thing I always say is you have to model it, right? So that's how kids learn, right? They learn through modeling. So I there are many ways that kids can learn self-compassion, but I think the most important way is for the parent to model it. So in order for the parent to model it, the parent has to learn how to be self-compassionate first and foremost, right? And there are many classes that are taught, and of course now, since the pandemic, everything is taught online. So you can take these courses online. There's also a number of books that are out for adults and for teens. So yeah, so there's a workbook that's called Mindful Self-Compassion. I think it's called the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook. Have it right over here. and by Kristen Neff and Chris Germer. There is Self-Compassion for Dummies, which is a really wonderful book with lots of humor and lots of stories by Steve Hickman. And then there were others also. There's a Self-Compassion for Parents book also. But so those are different ways for parents to learn self-compassion. For teens, we also offer teen classes, and those are offered now in the pandemic online, also through the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion. There are a number of books. My books are for teens. So there's I have a workbook, and then another book that's not a workbook, and then a book for that I co-authored with pediatrician Mark Burton on self-compassion for teens with ADHD. And yes, we always have kids in our class who are on the spectrum. And it's, what I hear is that it's, from their parents, is that it's really helpful for them.
I could definitely see that for sure, because I do know well, any child gets stuck, they get stuck, but some of these children that are on the spectrum, when they get stuck, they're stuck for quite a while, and the parents get really frustrated. I really like how you did say it does start with the parents and that role modeling piece. And that's true, because our children are little birds. They take everything in and they mimic.
Mm-hmm.
So I really like how you pointed that out, because I do stress too that it has to start with us. So the kids could, we could teach the kids until the cows come home, but if we can't continue with those type of strategies with our children, because we don't know about them, it's not going to be beneficial, is what I'm hearing. So I like the way how you said that, it does start with us, and I think it's very, very, very valuable. And I can't wait to share this information, because you've planted a few seeds in my head too, which I like, they're going to start to grow and blossom. So I know you talked a lot about, the courses and stuff, like, that they can take some of these self-compassion courses and workbooks. Is there any other place where they can learn more about self-compassion?
Yeah, I think there's a number of websites. So I think
Okay.
probably the most comprehensive website is the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion. And that website is centerformsc.org. That's probably the best place, because they have lots and lots of information. There's also selfcompassion.org with a hyphen, so self-compassion.org, which is Kristen Neff's website, which is the website. Kristen Neff is the pioneer in self-compassion. She was the one who published the first articles in 2003 and defined self-compassion. The definition that I gave you is Kristen Neff's definition. I have a fair amount on my website, which is just KarenBluth.com. It's another website. Yeah, that's 3. I think that's probably enough. And of course, all the websites lead to the other websites.
Yeah, exactly. It's like there's a web effect. But you just had a wealth of information. So we only have a couple of minutes left of our interview here. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing all this information. You planted a few seeds in my head, and they're going to start to grow, and I'm going to start using some of these strategies for myself. So I'm pretty sure, and I know for a fact, there's going to be other parents that are going to just blossom through this, because I think there is a piece that's missing, and that self-compassion and mindfulness. People talk about it, but do they really understand it? And I think that's where the gap is. So I think if we can close the gap with the awareness and be able to help support and teach people, I think we're going to have resilient children, because the children are our future. And it's interesting how you say, oh, back in 2003, that was quite a while ago. I still think 2003 is like just yesterday, time-wise.
I know. Yeah, I know. It's a crazy thing, this time thing,
It is. Well, Dr. Karen Bluth, I want to thank you so much for being part of this series. It's meant a lot to me, and I know for a fact you're going to be supporting and helping a lot of parents in need. getting the information out there and having awareness is, I think, is one of the biggest tools we can give people going through all this uncertainty right now.
Mhm. Well,
So,
this is my mission, so I am happy to help in any way I can.
well, thank you very much, and we will definitely keep in contact.
Okay, well, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you.